come here to take your IQ and your talent and put it to some patriotic fucking use. And where does it say that a good news show can't be popular?
Nielsen ratings.
We're going to do a good news show and make it popular at the same time.
That is impossible.
Between your brains, charm, looks, and affability, and my
refusal to live in
expertise
reality.
you.
It's impossible that the social scientists have concluded that the country is more polarized than at any time since the Civil War. The Civil War. Social scientists have concluded that the country is more polarized than at any time since the Civil War. The Civil War. Since the Civil War. Civil War.
This is a clip from the series premiere of The Newsroom, a show that premiered on HBO on June 24th, 2012. This specific scene takes place on April 20th, 2010. So another way of describing this specific situation would be that a 2012 audience witnessed fictionalized characters from 2010 not so subtly imply that at this moment in history, the year 2010, America is at Civil War levels of division. Maybe I'm suffering from some recency bias here, but ever since good old Donnie announced his presidential run with his classic, quote, "I condemn all Nazis, I recognize my white privilege, and I want to promote a healthy melting pot of different races, ethnicities, genders, and sexual orientations." Wait, that doesn't sound right. Oh, right, it was actually that Mexicans are rapists. Oops. The Newsroom was developed and principally written by famous screenwriter Aaron Sorkin, whose work on movies such as A Few Good Men, The American President, The Social Network, and Moneyball, and television shows Sports Night and The West Wing made him one of the most acclaimed screenwriters working today. In covering Aaron Sorkin's script for 2015 Steve Jobs, the New York Times wrote that, quote, "Everyone in Hollywood knows what an Aaron Sorkin project denotes. A TV show or film that combines old-fashioned craftsmanship and up-to-date settings, along with fusillades," yes, I had to look that up, "of feisty dialogue delivered by quintessential contemporary types. Newsmen, politicians, techies. Sorkin specializes in heroic weird savants and in stories that find gripping drama in characters most comfortable staring at a laptop." By 2011, he and HBO worked together to produce a run of 10 episodes that will be known as the first season of The Newsroom. The general concept behind the show was that it would center around a group of fictional news journalists working for the fictional news division of Atlanta's Cable News, or ACN for short, reacting to actual real-world events that occurred. The first episode, as previously stated, aired on June 24th, 2012, but spent the majority of its time on the day of the infamous BP oil spill, April 20th, 2010. Later episodes would cover the shooting of Gabrielle Giffords, the killing of Osama bin Laden, the 2012 presidential election, and the Boston Marathon bombing. After 3 seasons and 25 episodes, it was canceled. Recently, rumors of a reboot have surfaced, but just as quickly as they surfaced, Aaron Sorkin was there himself to shut them down.
Creation of news.
I wish the show was on the air now. I would love to be writing it now, but there are other things coming up. I have no plans to return there.
However, like Sorkin himself, I still can't help but notice the undeniable relevance of a show like The Newsroom. Beyond the general concept of a show about reporters doing the news during an era of fake news, Aaron Sorkin's short-lived television program remains fitting for a number of very specific reasons, one of which being the highlight about the year 2010 being the most divisive time in this country since the Civil War. In this clip, lead character and Newsnight anchor Will McAvoy, played by the king himself, Jeff Daniels, even goes on to say,
"People choose the facts they want now."
Why, yes, they do, Mr. McAvoy.
Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that.
So, this series of video essays will explore a few specific topics related to The Newsroom. Its exploration of gender in the workplace and in news, usage of news and political rhetoric, and pushback against fake news. But I think I should start at the beginning. The very first scene of The Newsroom. Sure, this 8-minute scene represents an incredibly small portion of this 25-hour-long program, but in my opinion, it offers more content worthy of analysis than any other individual scene in the entirety of The Newsroom. However, it originally wasn't even supposed to exist.
Stories are basically about, it was a typical day when all of a sudden this happened. I wanted it to be a typical day. He comes into work and he discovers that his staff is gone. And the way I'd written it, we just hear about this thing that had happened 3 weeks earlier. It was Scott Rudin who said, why don't you take a stab at writing the thing that happened? Let's just see what happens if you do that.
And this was the result. So let's break this scene down. The opening scene takes place on March 30th, 2010. Successful ACN anchor Will McAvoy is one of 3 panelists during a Q&A session at Northwestern University. He sits in between 2 people who appear to be, from the perspective of the audience, a bleeding heart liberal on the left and a bleeding heart conservative on the right. Very clever, Mr. Sorkin. He does his best to please everyone several times, including deflecting a question about his political leanings with the response,
I consider myself a New York Jets fan, Stephen.
The entire panel then gets asked the following question.
Can you say why America is the greatest country in the world?
The liberal answers.
Diversity and opportunity.
The conservative answers.
Freedom and freedom. So let's keep it that way.
Will answers.
Will.
The New York Jets.
The New York Jets.
However, after a repeated pressing from the host of the panel,
I'm going to hold you to an answer on that. What makes America the greatest country in the world?
Well, our Constitution is a masterpiece. James Madison was a genius. The Declaration of Independence is, for me, the single greatest piece of American writing.
One's a set of laws and the other's a declaration of war. I want a human moment from you.
and after continuing to think he sees someone he knows in the crowd, who eventually holds up a sign saying it's not, he finally lets go.
Why is
America not the greatest country in the world, Professor? That's my answer.
You're saying...
Yes.
And then the carnage begins.
Let's talk about...
Fine. Sharon, the NEA is a loser. Yeah, it accounts for a penny out of our paycheck, but he gets to hit you with it anytime he wants. It doesn't cost money. It costs votes. It costs airtime and column inches. You know why people don't like liberals? Because they lose. If liberals are so fucking smart, how come they lose so goddamn always?
Hey.
And with a straight face, you're gonna tell students that America is so star-spangled awesome that we're the only ones in the world who have freedom? Canada has freedom. Japan has freedom. The UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Australia, Belgium has freedom. So 207 sovereign states in the world, like 180 of them have freedom.
All right.
And yeah, you, sorority girl, just in case you accidentally wander into a voting booth one day, there's some things you should know. And one of them is, there is absolutely no evidence to support the statement that we're the greatest country in the world. We're 7th in literacy, 27th in math, 22nd in science, 49th in life expectancy, 178th in infant mortality, 3rd in median household income, number 4 in labor force, and number 4 in exports. We lead the world in only 3 categories: number of incarcerated citizens per capita, number of adults who believe angels are real, and defense spending, where we spend more than the next 26 countries combined, 25 of whom are allies. Now, none of this is the fault of a 20-year-old college student, but you nonetheless are, without a doubt, a member of the worst generation ever. So when you ask what makes us the greatest country in the world, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Yosemite?
First of all, if this is your first time watching this clip, then I hope you had the same holy shit reaction I had on my first viewing. Second, this first half of Will's speech contrasts greatly with the second. This half is full of fire and a tone that screams, I'm so done with listening to these bullshit platitudes, both from the people around me and from myself. He also uses this time to decidedly talk at people rather than with or to them, with varying degrees of success. To the liberal.
You know why people don't like liberals? Because they lose. If liberals are so fucking smart, how come they lose so goddamn always?
Hey.
This is one of a handful of moments where Will isn't quite as correct as he thinks he is. Liberals losing so goddamn always is quite a broad stroke when considering the entire spectrum of American politics. Sure, liberals should and probably could win more often than they do. And the fact that this premiered 4 years before one of the biggest liberal political election debacles in American history is quite telling. But if we're using the pejorative term of liberals here, if they never won, I imagine there might not have been an end to slavery. There might not have been the beginning of equal voting rights. And there might not be the existence of Social Security, along with a buttload of things that came after this episode, including gay marriage. To the conservative.
And with a straight face, you're gonna tell students that America is so star-spangled awesome that we're the only ones in the world who have freedom? Canada has freedom. Japan has freedom. The UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Australia, Belgium has freedom. So 207 sovereign states in the world, like 180 of them have freedom.
All right.
I mean, this might be the most satisfying part of this scene. One of Merriam-Webster's synonyms for freedom is independence. And when looking at the official listing of independent states from the Department of State, we see that as of 2019, there are 195 independent states in the world. Not to diminish freedom or anything, but to say America is the greatest country in the world because it is free is incredibly egocentric. Before we discuss his response to the college student, let's settle a few things. First, his sorority girl diss is an important element of both this scene and the show as a whole, but it will be expanded upon in another video in this series. And second, much of this segment is a list of statistics on the rankings of the US and the world at that time, so I will be complementing that with a list of the most current US rankings in the world today, courtesy of the World Factbook, the Program for International Student Assessment, the Washington Post, and Statista.
There is absolutely no evidence to support the statement that we're the greatest country in the world. We're 7th in literacy, 27th in math, 22nd in science, 49th in life expectancy, 178th in infant mortality, 3rd in median household income, number 4 in labor force, and number 4 in export. We lead the world in only 3 categories: number of incarcerated citizens per capita, number of adults who believe angels are real, and defense spending, where we spend more than the next 26 countries combined, 25 of whom are allies. Now, none of this is the fault of a 20-year-old college student, but you nonetheless are, without a doubt, a member of the worst generation ever. So when you ask what makes us the greatest country in the world, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Yosemite?
I must admit that Yosemite line is pretty great, but it's preceded by a pretty bold claim: the worst generation ever. Personally, I don't believe there's actually any feasible way to accurately measure, quote, quality of generation. There's just too many factors and an innumerable amount of people to take into consideration. But Will doesn't make it any easier. He makes the claim, then immediately moves on. Another questionable point in a rant that has flashes of brilliance. But now, let's see the second half of his speech.
Sure used to be. We stood up for what was right. We fought for moral reasons. We passed laws, struck down laws for moral reasons. We waged wars on poverty, not poor people. We sacrificed, we cared about our neighbors, we put our money where our mouths were, and we never beat our chest. We built great big things, made ungodly technological advances, explored the universe, cured diseases, and we cultivated the world's greatest artists and the world's greatest economy. We reached for the stars, acted like men. We aspired to intelligence. We didn't belittle it. It didn't make us feel inferior. We didn't identify ourselves by who we voted for in the last election, and we didn't scare so easy. We were able to be all these things and do all these things because we were informed by great men, men who were revered. First step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one. America is not the greatest country in the world anymore. Enough?
Now, this half is also by no means a perfectly accurate summarization of America. It's a highly subjective account of a non-specific time in our history where great things were accomplished. The emphasis on men here is a point that will be brought up later, but the idea that we never beat our chests or scared so easy? The entire basis of the Cold War was that we were a global superpower scared of the actions of another global superpower. Outside of these flaws, this reads like poetry. His tone has shifted from confrontation to reflection. The inner thoughts of his mind seem to be truly pouring out in a heartfelt way that feels real. Sure, it has its flaws and doesn't perfectly hold up against scrutiny, but telling Americans that they can be much better than what they've become certainly feels like a step in the right direction. So the show's goal with this scene was to not just establish the tone and setting of the story, but to also reflect on the status of America in the world at the time via an intelligent, albeit slightly unhinged, source. And it certainly succeeded in getting people's attention, attracting 11 million views on YouTube and generating intense discussion in the comments section below. How can we use this to better ourselves and America going forward? I would argue not like this.
Fuck Islam! Fuck them! Fuck Islam! Get out of here, Paul!
Will McAvoy is far from the first person to believe that America could do better. But the latest and most vocal group of people that believe this display that message loudly and clearly. Liberal groups could certainly be guilty of vocal opposition, but what separates them from this group is that not only does this group think that America can be better, but it also wants to go back to a mystic time in America's history that served all its citizens better than it does now. Do their philosophies and ideas about what that means match up with McAvoy's? My best guess would be no. What these people are doing is embodying the first half of McAvoy's monologue, angrily pointing the finger at other people in a destructive fashion that does not encourage or foster dialogue, but rather divides people across various lines, whether they be generational lines, racial lines, or of course, political lines. What America needs now, and honestly, for always, is introspection and reflection, like the second half of McAvoy's speech. Looking inward and within is helpful advice for almost any situation, but it's definitely helpful when being informed citizens, let alone proper public servants. Focusing on how and why we can be great people is the first step to figuring out why we can be a great nation. If the newsroom gets nothing else right, it gets right the fact that morality can never be forgotten.
Enough?